Hey, it's Krieger here, and today I'll explore the final piece to heal the poor and Puer Aeternus, aka the man-child or woman-child. We'll discuss practical steps to creating a meaningful life, and you'll understand how flow is the key to stop caring what people think and a powerful antidote to nihilism. And this whole series is based on my book Pistes Demystify Human Psychology, and you can claim your copy when you join my newsletter down below. So let's quickly recap that Carl Jung and von Franz used to say that the cure for the poor and Puer Aeternus is hard work. But a crucial distinction must be made between mere work and meaningful work. And to accomplish that, I'd like to bring the concept of resistance, coined by Steven Pressfield in one of my favorite books of all time, probably one of the best I ever read, The War of Art. And Steven Pressfield says that resistance with a capital R is the enemy within. And this force is in direct proportion to how important a task is for the development of our souls. In other words, the cure isn't mindlessly working and doing random chores and tasks. To overcome the poor, we must move in the direction of our fears and put our talents in service of something greater than ourselves. And we constantly have to remember the resistance always shows its hideous face when we are about to accomplish something great, when we are about to move to the next level. And that's why it's easy to know when we are on the right path. Because when we refuse this calling, we feel like a part of us is dying. In contrast, when we are fully engaged in this mission and we are giving all we've got, we start feeling truly alive. So in the previous video, we explored the biggest shadow of the Puer Aeternus and how to integrate it. So now we're gonna move one step further and discuss how overcoming the poor and creating a meaningful life is dependent on the commitment to mastering a craft. Now, I had a long way to go before I had this clarity, and I understood I was meant to do the kind of work I'm doing today. Because for the longest time, I had this inner void. I desperately wanted to be good at something, but honestly, my belief in myself was so low that I could never stick to anything long enough to truly develop myself. I used to be extremely indecisive. Looking back, it's kind of funny. So I started college at 17 and I studied business for a semester. And honestly, I have no idea why I did that, because the mere thought of working in a company gives me crippling anxiety. But anyway, after that, I switched to marketing and I did that for a whole year. And it was a bit better. I kind of liked it, but it was still meaningless. At that moment, what I really wanted to do was music. But again, I was afraid to pursue it, and resistance took the best of me for a very long time. And I remember the semester was about to start, and I just couldn't take it anymore to keep studying marketing or business and all of this crap. So in a surge of, let's say, courage and inspiration, I just decided to enroll in music school. And this was the first important decision I ever made in my life, because it represents the first step in my individuation journey and separation from my parents. And with this decision, I experienced a new vitality that affected everything. This was the same moment I bought my precarious but invaluable home gym I told you about in the last video. I lost 25 kilos and my anxiety and depression finally started fading. So music was the first thing I ever took seriously in my life, and I was willing to do whatever it took to become good at it. And I would practice hours and hours every day, and this brought meaning and direction to my life. And I didn't know at the time, but these were my first experiences with the flow state, one of the keys to living a meaningful life and a powerful antidote to other people's judgments and opinions. Because when you find something that demands skill and you can do it for hours and hours, regardless of external pressure, you may have found a gift. Because people think that achieving meaning is something static, like a final destination. And this certainly has a philosophical value, but in practice, I believe that meaning lies in being fully immersed in something deeply valuable and putting it in service of other people. So it's internal and external and selfish and selfless at the same time. So after all of these years of working as a therapist and analyzing people from over 20 countries, I understood that 99% of people know exactly what they want to do with their lives. The problem is always fear. Maybe they're afraid of disappointing their parents or facing the judgment of other people. Maybe they're afraid of failure and don't feel confident in their abilities. Or maybe they're afraid of being vulnerable and following their souls. However, it's only on the sacred path that you can feel truly fulfilled. And that's why the first key to creating meaning and unlocking the flow state is deeply caring about something. You must allow yourself to be fully affected by it. Because most people feel lost and succumb to nihilism because they avoid this responsibility. After all, once you care about something, this immediately puts you in a vulnerable position. Suddenly, the stakes are high, you have skin in the game, and you realize that everything depends on you. The excuses you had are gone, so either you act on it or you continue to feel anxious and depressed. But being in this position is exactly what triggers the flow state. And this is the moment you feel truly alive and start being driven by purpose. So when you commit to exploring your potential and authentic desires, you can tap into an endless source of motivation. And when you're guided by something greater than you, work doesn't feel like work, and you unlock an effortless state. And now, instead of being guided by fear and avoiding mistakes, you suddenly find yourself being sustained by this deep inspiration. And I know that for some people this may sound a bit woo-woo or whatever, but my poetic argumentation is backed by neuroscience and the positive psychology field. So Martin Seligman, in his book Authentic Happiness, explores three types of happiness. The first one is the pleasant life, and it basically consists of maximizing pleasant bodily sensations, like eating your favorite foods. And in my case, a great Italian pasta with a good wine will do it. And it's undeniable that it's important to learn how to enjoy these moments, and as they say in Argentina, disfrutar la buena comida. But we also know that these moments are very fleeting, and devoting a life to seeking pleasure quickly becomes poisonous to the body and soul. And it's an obvious sign of a negative mother complex. Now, the second layer of happiness is the good life or engaged life. And this layer consists of exploring our potential and cultivating our virtues and strengths. So it's directly linked to experiencing the flow state or being in the zone. And this state allows you to be fully immersed in an activity that is deeply pleasurable and rewarding. It is autotelic. In other words, the enjoyment of the activity itself is the payoff. And that's why flow is the secret to unleashing intrinsic motivation. And finally, the third layer of happiness is the meaningful life. And this last dimension evokes a deep sense of purpose. And this happens the moment we put our talents in service of others and the higher good. And this unlocks a new layer of the human experience and a deeper sense of lasting fulfillment. Now, if you've been paying attention, the secret lies in learning to unlock the flow state, as the third layer is dependent on that. So flow is a concept created by Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I probably butchered his name, but he describes it as a state of complete absorption in an autotelic activity, in which the challenges perfectly match the individual's skill. However, recent research discovered that true flow only occurs when the skills and the challenges are high. So that's why people who experience this state are constantly pushing their boundaries, since the better you get at something, the more you are rewarded with flow. And also, experiencing flow has incredible benefits, and some even feel made up, like boosting our productivity by 500% without feeling burnt out, and tremendously enhancing our creativity and learning capacities. So now I'll show you a list of benefits from The Rise of Superman by Steven Kotler, the most respected researcher in this field. So you can pause the video for a moment if you want to read all the benefits. And honestly, these benefits alone are amazing and incredible. But experiencing flow can be a lot more profound. And in fact, flow used to be studied as religious experiences by the psychologist William James, as peak experiences by Abraham Maslow, and finally as numinous experiences by Carl Jung. And I give you a detailed explanation about it in my book on the chapter about archetypes. But what you have to understand is that the description of religious and flow experiences perfectly align with one another, such as experiencing time dilation, being fully present, and the sensation that you are merging with external elements and even with other people. And this happens especially in creative settings, in which we feel like a higher force is guiding us, and we are a channel translating the message of the creative spirit. When we are playing music, for instance, we suddenly feel like one with our instrument, and it's as if our hands are moving by themselves, and we are transported to another plane. When we are doing sports, our senses are heightened, we are more agile, and we can predict everybody's movements. So in flow, we are also more creative and always find new connections and unexpected answers. And as Stephen Kotler says, flow allows real magic to happen. So every time we experience this state, we feel more alive, inspired, and complete. Moreover, flow can potentially give us a sense of meaning and purpose when shared with others. So as you can see, religious experiences aren't limited to traditional religious settings. They happen especially when we are fully committed to mastering a craft. And that's why the traditional advice of just follow your passions is simultaneously great and terrible advice. First, it's great because our passions often uncover fields in which we are more prone to experiencing flow. But it's also terrible because experiencing flow is dependent on mastering a craft. In other words, a sense of enjoyment only comes when you devote time to developing an ability. So the better you get at something, the more fulfillment and motivation you experience. Now, before we move on to the final part, let me tell you that you can find a step-by-step to conquer the Puer and Puer Aeternus and all the tools you need, including how to access the flow state, in my accessible course, Katabasis the Shadow Integration Manual. And if you'd like to work one-on-one with me, I also invite you to check my mentorship. Links down below. Now, I've encountered many people who claim to not have any talents and are disconnected from their true aspirations. And in this case, I see two major tendencies. So first, they're judging themselves through the wrong set of values and cultural standards. So do you remember the live script we discussed at the beginning of the series? And second, they don't want to bear any responsibilities and allow resistance to win. But once more, this conceals a passive, childish attitude that expects everything to just fall on their laps, and the infantile desire to be magically good at something without putting any effort. And that's why it's important to break all illusions regarding talents, because the poor often thinks that God blessed certain individuals who are magically good in their fields. The truth is that having a talent simply means that you have the potential to excel in something, but you still have to put in the work. And some people even defend that the concept of talent is completely irrelevant and only hard work counts. But my position is somewhere in the middle. I do believe that people have certain aptitudes, but without dedication, they are useless. For instance, I could apply all my efforts to learning physics, but I'll never be as good as I am in psychology. And that's why we must commit to developing a craft that's aligned with our natural tendencies and abilities. And once we do that, experiencing flow is simply a byproduct. And that's why it's so important to challenge the unconscious scripts running our lives and uncover our true personalities. And we do that by devoting time to exploring our true interests, giving life to our dormant abilities, and going our own way. Because we can only shift our values through concrete action. Now, the next step is understanding how our crafts can enrich other people's lives and finally create meaning. And to accomplish that, we have to explore what it truly means to be in service of other people, because the poor have a great tendency to people-pleasing. And this gives them the illusion that they're always selflessly living for others. However, they fail to recognize that every action has an ulterior motive. I mean, they are sacrificing themselves because they always expect something in return. And that's why every relationship feels inauthentic and becomes a transaction. But the harsh truth is that people-pleasing has a narcissistic core. An infantile ego makes you live in a realm of projections and makes you believe that the world revolves around you and everyone must be at your disposal. But to find meaning, we must go beyond the ego, break free from selfish power pursuits, and be in service of the self. Now, this people-pleasing tendency has its roots in the external sense of self-worth we explored in the other videos. And that's why the poor tends to be exclusively motivated by gaining the approval of others and external pressure. Because when it comes to his own projects, usually paralyzing perfectionism and procrastination wins. But by now, I imagine you already know that this is part of his desire to remain childish, and by passively relying on what other people expect of him, he can avoid the responsibility of creating his own life and making his own decisions. And that's why the poor must learn how to do things out of his own volition, regardless of external pressure. So it's important to be decisive about what you truly want in life. Take a stance and stop being a hostage to other people's judgments and opinions. And we already covered the first step in the previous video, which is reconnecting with the body and the practical aspects of life. But we can take things to the next level with the flow state. Since in flow there isn't a final goal or a destination, we're not concerned with how good we look for others. We're doing it because it is pleasurable, deeply rewarding, and exploring our gifts is inspiring. And I often experience this state when I'm playing music, writing, grinding in the gym, recording these videos, and especially when I'm conducting therapy sessions. I feel that my sensibility is heightened and I know exactly what I have to say. But as I mentioned, we can only access the flow state when we deeply care about something and allow ourselves to be fully affected by it. When something has this level of importance in our lives, suddenly what other people think stops mattering so much. And it's not that we stop caring completely, nor should this be the goal. But when we have access to something so potent, what other people think becomes irrelevant. And we finally unlock intrinsic motivation. And now we are fueled by the desire to excel and constantly achieve new heights. We shift the external sense of self-worth to following what brings us joy. And that's why flow is a powerful antidote to other people's judgments, perfectionism, and people-pleasing. Moreover, we fall in love with challenges and doing hard things because they expand who we are. And as a client of mine used to say, most people live comfortably miserable lives. And that's why to find meaning, we must follow resistance and put ourselves in situations that demand growth. We must give ourselves no other choice but to go all in. And that's how we earn self-confidence, by choosing to do the hard thing and building our bank of evidence. Now, it's important to realize that flow can be experienced completely alone, like when you are grinding in the gym or running, or when you are being creative. And when we enter this state, profound shifts can happen, and we access powerful internal resources that can be transported to other areas. Moreover, when we experience flow in one area, this primes us to experience this state in all other dimensions of our lives. For instance, pushing our body to its limits or taking creative risks allows us to do the same in our relationships and our business. And that's why your flow activity and your profession can be completely separated from one another. But to experience true meaning, the expression of your talents must be attached to a vision and a bigger picture. So simply put, the more responsibility we accept, the more meaning we tend to experience. In reality, things aren't easier because we are following our authentic paths, but by engaging with our souls, meaning is unraveled. But again, it's not something static. Meaning is experienced within the relationship with the soul, and meaning has to be created ever anew with each step we take. And finally, you can find a step-by-step to conquer the Puer and Puer Aeternus in the next video over here.